Welcome everyone to this evening's President's Lecture by Scott Hartwig. And I just want to thank Scott again for joining us and accommodating our virtual presentation. It looks like it's just going to be a tremendous success. I would also like to thank Cindy Powers, Director of Continuing Education and Lifelong Learning, for promoting this event. Cindy, you do a remarkable job with the President's Lecture and Lifelong Learning and all of our programs. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jennifer Murray, Director of the Civil War Center, who will deliver the formal introduction of this evening's distinguished speaker. Thank you all for joining us.
Dr. Hendricks, thank you for that very kind introduction, and in particular, allow me to express my gratitude for allocating this month's lecture to a Civil War topic. I was particularly thrilled to hear that we were going to do something focusing on the Civil War for this month. We've been planning this for a while, of course, and while I was initially bummed about the weather forecast, as we've chatted about as people were coming into the Zoom room, I'm thrilled to see a healthy 171 people on Zoom tonight from all across the country. So what a wonderful testament to the prestige of our speaker and to the importance of the American Civil War, both in the past and the present. So I thought I'd give a note about format before I introduce Scott. As we were talking about this event and the logistics of it, initially, Scott and I were going to engage in person in a little bit more of a conversation or a dialogue rather than a traditional lecture. And I'm hopeful that we'll still be able to replicate a little bit of that. The way that Scott and I decided to handle the virtual format tonight is that Scott will speak for about 20 or 25 minutes. And then I'm going to field some questions from the chat. So please feel free to drop questions in the chat. I'll moderate that and then deliver them to Scott to sort of put some parameters on the discussion. And I have a couple questions also that I'm going to give to Scott for the balance of the time. And we're aiming to be here until about 7:30. So hunker in with your hot tea and your warm blanket for about an hour of good conversation tonight with Scott. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Scott Hartwig, but first sort of a comment about the Civil War Center here at Shepherd. As Dr. Hendricks mentioned, I'm the director of the Civil War Center here at Shepherd University. And in a minute, when I switch over to my PowerPoint, I'm going to do a little bit of promotion for some of the upcoming events that we have here at the Civil War Center. So if you're interested in more talks like this, please follow us on social media or look us up online. I'll put our website in the chat box so you can continue to hopefully engage in a lot of this meaningful programming that we do here at Shepherd and through the Civil War Center. There's something really special and unique here with this Civil War Center, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be the director of this prestigious institution. And I'm particularly thrilled, Scott, to introduce you tonight. I'm gonna give a formal introduction, and then I'm gonna give a little personal anecdote before I turn it over to you. Many of you are familiar with Scott Hartwig. He, of course, is the supervisory park ranger at Gettysburg National Military Park. He retired in 2014 after a 34-year career service in the National Park Service, almost all of it spent at Gettysburg. Scott won the Regional Freeman Tilden Award for Excellence in Interpretation in 1993, and Scott was a key player for the design in nearly all aspects of the new Gettysburg Visitors Center and Museum. Scott is the author of To Antietam Creek, the Maryland Campaign from September 3rd to September 16th, which was published in the fall of 2012 by Johns Hopkins University Press, and the author of I Dread the Thought of the Place, the Battle of Antietam, and the End of the Maryland Campaign, which was also published by Johns Hopkins Press in August of 2023. And if any of you have this book, these two volumes, I can say definitively that these are magisterial, and I cannot imagine another word really needing to be written on the Maryland campaign because of the excellent work that Scott has done. His latter title, the I Dread the Thought of the Place, won the 2024 Barksdale Award, the Emerging Civil War Book Award, and was one of two books which received honorable mention for American Battlefield Trust's 2024 History Prize. Now, my personal anecdote and why I'm particularly happy to have Scott joining us tonight is that I've known Scott Hartwig for over 20 years. I met Scott as a undergraduate student when I was looking to do an internship the summer between my junior and senior year. My undergrad's from Frostburg State, about an hour and a half from here over in Western Maryland. And I applied for an internship at Gettysburg National Military Park, and Scott Hartwig selected me for that internship. I spent about 16 weeks working for Scott that summer and was fortunate enough to go back as a seasonal park ranger for 9 years. And I say this because I owe a tremendous amount to Scott, particularly in my professional career. And I say with a large degree of certitude, were it not for Scott Hartwig, I wouldn't be sitting here doing what I'm doing with you all tonight. So I'm profoundly grateful for Scott's mentorship, and I owe him a great deal professionally. So I was thrilled to introduce you and thrilled to have you join us for tonight's distinguished President's Lecture, Scott. And now, let me screen share. Hopefully that all looks good on your end. And make one comment, one final comment, promise. Just about upcoming events for the Civil War Center, y'all. I have a captive audience right now, so I wanted to make a pitch about some of our events coming up. Those of you that are local or at least within a driving distance, we have a particularly aggressive agenda slated for the spring of 2026 with events coming on each month. And if you're interested, I'll drop the link in the chat, but please check us out online at shepherd.edu/Civil War. You can click on the tab on the left to upcoming events, and you can learn more information about all the robust programming that we have coming up over the course of the next 12 months. So without further ado, Scott, thank you for joining us. I look forward to your talk this evening. Scott Hartwig, please.
Okay, well, Jen, thanks so much. And Dr. Hendricks, thanks for inviting me to give this talk. And Cindy, I dealt with Cindy quite a bit on the logistics of getting everything set up. I really appreciate all of her help. And I really appreciate all the people who've logged on to watch this tonight. There's a lot of other things you could probably do with your time, and I appreciate you dedicating some time to this. I'm sure some of you are probably a little bit sore because if you were like me, I spent about 3 hours today shoveling and snow blowing because we had sleet on top of 12 inches of snow, and then you had to break up. Well, I snow blowed yesterday, so it made it a little bit easier, but the snow was very hard today, and I had to break it all up. It's a big job. So anyway, this is a lot more fun than doing that. So anyway, for those of you who are familiar with the books that I wrote, and I don't know if you can see this on this or if you're just seeing the screen, but these are the two books. I Dread the Thought of the Place to Antietam Creek. The good workout tools right here. To Antietam Creek is about 800 pages. I Dread the Thought of the Place is 960 pages. So the question that I think you could legitimately ask is, what was I thinking? Why would I possibly write two books of that length about one battle that occurred about 163 years ago? It will be 164 this coming September. Why did I bother doing that? What was I trying to accomplish with this? What does it matter? Who cares? I mean, who cares about a battle that occurred 160 some years ago? Many people in our country today have had a bad experience with history when they've been taught history. They had to memorize things, they had to memorize dates and names, and they just didn't see any relevance in their life. There was no relevance to them. Why should I pick up a 960-page book about a Civil War battle? What can I possibly learn from that is going to be relevant in my life? So this is, I mean, I heard this for years when I was working for the National Park Service from people constantly. They didn't have a good experience with history. History was something that was boring. I would imagine today, if you polled average people in any city in America and you asked them what happened in the Battle of Antietam and when did the Battle of Antietam happen, most people would probably have never heard of it. So what we think about a lot of times is we think about what is happening right now in our lives and maybe what's happening this coming weekend. But what happened 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 100 years ago, whatever, oftentimes it just isn't interesting to people. So obviously, if I spent the time to write these two books, because it took me a long time. It took me, if you put the two books together, it's about 30 years. And it's not every day, right? But I spent a lot of time working on these books. I obviously felt that there was value in this. I felt that there was something that people could learn something from the past by reading these books. And I believe that. I believe we can learn from the past. Because the people, particularly like in a case like Antietam, or take the Great Depression, or World War II, or take your pick. These were people who were living in extraordinary circumstances. How did these people get through these extraordinary circumstances? Is there something we can learn? I never forgot one time I did a 2-day tour for all the officers of a battalion of the 10th Mountain Division that was visiting Gettysburg. And one of our sessions we spent on Little Round Top, and I talked about Chamberlain and the 20th Maine on Little Round Top. And I remember the commander of the battalion's name was Carl Eikenberry. And Carl Eikenberry, you may have heard of him. He became the commander-in-chief of all NATO forces in Afghanistan when President Obama was president. And he then became the ambassador to Afghanistan. So he attained some pretty high-level positions. And I remember when I finished up with the talk on Little Round Top, Carl Eikenberry said to me, he goes, you know, the weapons they use, the tactics they use, they don't mean anything to these guys. It doesn't mean anything to them because they don't use any weapons like that. They don't use any tactics like that. But he said the value of the story here at Little Round Top is that if they ever are in a situation where it doesn't look like they may be able to get out of it, Chamberlain is a reminder that they can. That's the relevance of history of what Joshua Chamberlain did on Little Round Top to an Army officer in the late or early 1990s is when that occurred. So tonight, what I want to do in the short time that I'm going to talk, and I don't want to talk too long so we can get into some questions, is I want to look at 4 individuals, just 4 people associated with the Battle of Antietam, and what can we learn from them? What can they teach us today, right now, in our lives? Okay, so Jen, if you can cue up the first slide. Okay, the first individual we're going to talk about is an Army surgeon. He's a surgeon of the 2nd Maryland Infantry. His name is Theodore Diamond. And Theodore Diamond was from Massachusetts, but he moved to New York. He lived in Utica, New York, and then eventually moved to Auburn, New York. And he was the resident physician at the Auburn State Prison. And he got the gold fever. He went out to California. He looked for gold about 1849. He came back. He continued to reside in Auburn. He was 43 years old in 1860. And when the Civil War began, he enrolled as the surgeon of the 19th New York Infantry. But then later on, he's going to be reassigned to be the surgeon of the 2nd Maryland Infantry. He also, while he was at Auburn, New York, he was the personal physician to William Henry Seward, who was Lincoln's Secretary of State. And so he had some connections pretty high up. But during the Battle of Antietam, Dr. Diamond is going to establish an aid station not terribly far away from the Rohrbach Bridge or the lower bridge, the Burnsides Bridge. He's under fire, but he's not actually directly in the battle. He's not firing a weapon. He's treating the people being affected by the weapons. But the story I want to focus on is not the battle. It's what happens after the battle is over. So it's September 18th, and Dr. Diamond is tasked with a job. And his job is to go to a place, a farm, where 140 wounded soldiers have been deposited with nothing, no aid, no help, no nothing. And he is to establish a field hospital. Now, the image you see here is not a field hospital at Antietam. It is a field hospital, I believe, at the Battle of Seven Pines during the Peninsula Campaign, but it gets across the idea of the conditions that might exist at a hospital. So Dr. Diamond, fortunately for us, kept a journal and also wrote to his wife about his experiences at this hospital. So let's read this. As this was my first regular field hospital, he's never done this before. I will tell how it was organized. In the first place, there was nothing detailed for me to begin with, and I had to form everything from the foundation. The first thing was I found I must have power to control all acting under my orders. So, out of stragglers I picked up in the vicinity, I organized a guard with a corporal at its head and divided it into reliefs and stationed them where I wanted them. The next thing was supplies and cooks and nurses. I started the driver with the ambulance. He picked up an ambulance, a broken down ambulance that he found, with the requisitions for what I wanted to Keedysville, which was Army headquarters, a small town right near Sharpsburg. I picked out a sufficient number of cooks and directed the preparation of food and coffee, furnishing an adequate quantity of supplies for one day's rations at a time. I then divided the nurses into reliefs, assigning each one a given number of the wounded to take care of, and fixed the relief role for each. These were made up of stragglers, picked up on the road, my guard halting and taking possession of all passers until I filled my quota. On going the rounds to inspect after dinner, I found one or two of the cooks and nurses had been willfully negligent of their duty to the wounded and were making themselves very comfortable out of the stimulants provided for the wounded. There was an orchard of apple trees convenient. I ordered the corporal of the guard to arrest these men and one of the guards also, who had joined them, and tie them up by their thumbs to the apple tree limbs so that their toes would just touch the ground, and to keep them there till they were satisfied they had to do just what they were ordered and be faithful to their duties, or it would be worse for them. For a day or two, I had some apple tree suspensions, and after that, everything went smoothly. Okay, let's go to the next slide, Jen. On September 25th, and this is an image of a field hospital. That is Dr. Abner Hurd of the 14th Indiana. So this is not Dr. Diamond's hospital, but this gives an idea of a hospital at Antietam. Diamond writes to his wife on September 25th, adding some more details about this hospital experience. I'm slowly traveling through the disposal of and provision for 140 poor fellows under my care here. Surgery, 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 food, 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 nurses, 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 cooks that get drunk, everybody employed looking out for number one, nobody caring for anybody else. Surgeons come here to get me to take care of their sick, not knowing or caring to do anything but shirk them off onto me, in addition to my other cases. And when I refuse, asking and arguing about what shall they do with him. Oh, the incompetencies and pay drawers in this army is enough to ruin any nation. More than half the time I've been sick since I've been here, but I'm not thoroughly well. I came here in 2 log houses and a barn. The medical director had deposited 140 wounded on the bare floors. They had not even straw under them. There was not a cook, nurses, or anything for them, and no provisions, dressings, or anything else. The next day, he, the medical director, got a furlough to go to Staten Island with his wounded brother-in-law. Well, I seized upon stragglers, orchard thieves, and anything, and made a guard of 6 men, gave them muskets. I then detailed out the rest, 5 cooks, 12 nurses, got my own steward, that's the person who distributes medicine. I got a broken ambulance and set it off after dressings, medicines, food, and candles, then went to work at the wounds, making a register between the whiles, and arresting nurses, cooks, and general thieves, and substituting others in their places, answering 40,000 questions from everybody meanwhile. Okay, what can we learn from Dr. Theodore Diamond? I think quite a bit. I think there's quite a bit that we can learn from Dr. Diamond. So what's the first thing that so none of us are probably going to be ever have to experience something this extreme, where you have 140 people whose lives depend on you, who are wounded by shells, bullets. You don't know how badly wounded some of these people are. They're just dumped on a floor, no straw, no provisions, no anything, nothing for you. You have to do everything yourself. So there's one thing that jumped out at me about this account. More than half the time I've been sick since I've been here, but I'm not thoroughly well. Dr. Diamond cannot call in sick. There's no calling in sick here. You've got to deal with this. Now, what does he have to do to get a field hospital started? Well, the first thing you have to do, you have to have discipline and you have to have order. So who are the people that Dr. Diamond has to get to become the individuals who are going to be his nurses and his cooks and his guards? Are they the cream of the crop? Are they trained? These men are stragglers. These are the riffraff of the army. These are some of your worst soldiers because they're just wandering away from their units. So how does he get these men? He doesn't tell us that. Somehow, by force of personality, he's able to get a guard of 6 men. He appoints one of them a corporal, and he gives them a job. And their mission is to bring order to this hospital. Once he has order, then he can start to work on the second things that are critical. He has to feed all of these men. He has to find the food. He doesn't have somebody who's doing this for him. He has to determine where the food is, who's going to go get it, what's the schedule they're going to get, how many rations is every wounded soldier going to get, who's going to deliver it to him, who's going to cook the food, what are the shifts that people work. He also has to have nurses. He has to have, as he mentions, a steward, someone who delivers the medicine to them. The nurses have to know how many men they need to take care of. What are they supposed to do? How do they know what they're supposed to do? He has to teach them everything. He also has to do all the surgery. He has to deal with all the nurses and train them. He's got cooks who are getting drunk. He's got guards who are getting drunk. He has to enforce discipline upon them. Now, the thing is, he makes sure they know he means business. But what Diamond does here is he gives all of these people, this riffraff, a purpose. He has a purpose for every individual there. And they come together. As he tells us, he said for a couple of days he had to hang guys by their thumbs. That might be really extreme for some of us as we think about that. But he's not dealing with the cream of the crop of the army. He's dealing with people who are some tough customers in the army. And he's got to instill discipline in there. He says to us, everybody is employed looking out for number one. I can't tell you how many people I had tell me in the years I was working at Gettysburg, oh, in those days, people were more patriotic than they are today. People were willing to pitch in and help out. Dr. Diamond would say that's nonsense. People are people. They're all looking out for number one. Well, most of the people around Dr. Diamond, they don't care for anybody else. What happens to his medical director? The medical director of the 9th Corps deposits Diamond at this hospital with 140 wounded with nothing to do, and he leaves. He leaves and takes his wounded brother-in-law back to New York. He abandons him. How many people have had a boss that you've been given a tough task to do, and the boss doesn't want to do his job? Or how many people have you had people around you in other departments, wherever you work, who don't want to carry their weight? They want to come to you and ask you to take on their job. As he says, with these surgeons coming to take care of their sick, not knowing or caring to do anything, but shirk them off onto me. We've all, if you've worked and been in the working world, you've all experienced people like that. And Diamond, he's disgusted by it. Oh, the incompetencies and page roars in this army is enough to ruin any nation. But Diamond perseveres. He does his job. He does his surgery. I don't know how many soldiers might have died at Diamond's hospital. I imagine that he had a very high success rate because he was very well organized. But what Diamond, to me, speaks to us today is that we're not going to face a situation exactly like Theodore Diamond, but we might face situations that have some similarities to it. And Diamond is an inspiration for what one person can do who um, gives people a purpose and is disciplined and focused on what is important in making sure you get the job done that needs to be done there. So let's move on to the next individual. Maria Hall did not fight in the Battle of Antietam. Uh, she did not come to the Antietam battlefield until after the battle was over. And she is 26 years old at the time of the battle in 1862. She's an attractive woman when she was 26, and when the war came, she really wanted to help out, and she appealed to she was in Washington, D.C. She lived in Washington, D.C. She appealed to Dorothea Dix, whose nickname was Dragon. Dorothea Dix was the person who was responsible for selecting female nurses. Most nurses in the Civil War are male. So this idea of having female nurses was a newer thing. Some people frowned upon it. And Dorothea Dix wanted her nurses to be over 30, plain looking, and wear drab, unhooped dresses and forego all cosmetics. You don't want to look attractive. I want plain people. This is a hard job. It's a disgusting job in a lot of ways. And a person like Maria Hall doesn't fit the bill. So Maria Hall is turned away. So Maria Hall is a very determined individual. So she volunteers at the Patent Office Hospital. And apparently she really did a good job there because it brought her to Dorothea Dix's attention. And Willie Lincoln had died of typhus, and Tad Lincoln was very sick. And they needed somebody who could actually go and be with Tad. And Dorothea Dix asked Maria Hall if she would do that. And she did. She did it for about a week. She was with Lincoln's son, Tad. And she met Lincoln and Mary. She was around them. And so she does that. And then she leaves Washington, D.C., and she goes down to the Virginia Peninsula. And she is at Harrison's Landing. After the 7 Days battles, the Army of the Potomac had retreated to Harrison's Landing. There's a lot of sick down there, and there's wounded from the 7 Days battles. And she travels down there and she works at the hospitals there. So there's a tremendous amount of risk in this, primarily risk from disease. But also, it's not something that society looks upon favorably of a young woman like this going in amongst men. You're going to see men without clothes on sometimes and things like that. And that's really frowned upon. So then Antietam occurs. And on September 21st, a friend alerts Maria Hall there's a desperate need for supplies and help on the battlefield. Now, one of the myths of these battles of the Civil War, like Antietam and Gettysburg and Chickamauga, is that the medical system was just totally ad hoc. You know, it was a mess. The reality was there was a medical system at these battles, and it was a good medical system. But these battles oftentimes eclipsed what the medical system was prepared for. So Antietam was bigger than any battle that had occurred before it, as far as the number of casualties occurred. So there was a lot of shortages of things and a desperate need for supplies. So she leaves for the front on September 22nd, this 26-year-old woman without any idea where she's needed. She heads out to Sharpsburg. And she's going to ultimately serve at the Hoffman Farm, which was on the northern end of the battlefield. She's going to go to the Stephen Grove Farm, which is west of Sharpsburg, mainly Confederate wounded there. She's going to be at the Dr. Ortho J. Smith Farm Hospital. And that photograph that I showed you of Surgeon Abner Hurd of the 14th Indiana, that's the hospital that I believe Maria Hall was at. Eventually, Maria Hall is going to end up at the Smoketown General Hospital, which was on the northern end of the battlefield. And she's going to remain there for about 9 months because that hospital does not close until May of 1863. So her work, what was her work? Her work consisted primarily of preparing food, serving to the patients. She also wrote letters home for those who were unable to do so. In addition, she sat by the men's beds, talked with them, read to them. A lot of these men were very depressed. They're injured. They're confined for weeks and months to a hospital bed. Some of them have amputated limbs. Everything you see every day is grim. Every day. For 9 months, you're there. Hall wrote about how she encountered tragic outcomes very frequently among her patients who succumbed to their wounds. How many last messages were taken, she wrote, and many precious treasures were committed to our charge to be sent home with a lock of hair and the last words of the sorrowing ones at home. So not maybe every day, but many days, Maria Hall she's made a relationship. She's established a relationship with this soldier. She knows his family. She knows his hopes and desires. The next day she comes in and he's dead. She has to cut a lock of hair off of him, gather up his personal belongings, maybe write a note to the family and send it home. A sergeant who was in the 78th New York said of Maria Hall, her self-sacrifice is worthy of something more than newspaper notice. So what he was saying to Sergeant is that, you can't really put into words what Maria Hall did at this hospital. Another said, no words or gold could not repay you for your sufferings, privations, the painful hard sights which the angels of the battlefield are willing to face. No, God alone can reward you. So what did Maria Hall have to muster to overcome the gender expectations of her time, but also the potential of disease and at a field hospital? I mean, this was an act of tremendous courage that Maria Hall illustrates here. This transcends time, what Maria Hall does. Someone today can do something similar to what Maria Hall does. What she does, what she teaches us, is to have courage. And this is real courage. This is real courage that Maria Hall shows. It definitely takes courage to walk into the face of bullets and shell fragments and things like that. But it takes the same type of courage to face death every day and look it in the eye, which is what she has to do when she works in those hospitals with people who might die, and give them some hope every day. And think about the mental trauma that places upon Maria Hall, the sort of steel that she has to have inside her. How did she do that? How did she find that within her? I don't know that Maria Hall could tell you that. I think that we just have to take from her story whatever we want. But hers is a story of inspiration to me that transcends time. It is something that travels beyond the Battle of Antietam to our lives today, to do something to make a difference, to make the world a better place. That's what Maria Hall is trying to do. And not in a situation where she's getting all sorts of gratification. She's not on Instagram. She's not an influencer, right? She's not, the only thing she's getting for this is the satisfaction that she's brought some sort of joy into a soldier's life on that day. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Now, this story is about a soldier who was in the Battle of Antietam. Rufus Dawes was the major of the 6th Wisconsin Infantry. And after the war was over, he wrote one of the great books of the Civil War, reminiscences of the Civil War, called Service with the 6th Wisconsin Volunteers. And his account of the Battle of Antietam is one of the best accounts of any battle. All right. Okay. You couldn't hear anything I was saying. Sorry about that. Okay, we're going to talk about Rufus Dawes. He was the major of the 6th Wisconsin Infantry. He was in the Battle of Antietam. And after the war was over, he wrote a reminiscence called Service with the 6th Wisconsin Volunteers. And in that reminiscence, he wrote one of the greatest accounts of a Civil War battle, the Battle of Antietam, that anybody's ever written. It's just fantastic. But I'm not going to read that to you. What I'm going to read to you is a letter that Dawes writes to his wife in 1881. At this time period, he is a congressman from Ohio. Rufus Dawes, Rufus, Rufus Dawes. Yeah, that's the right name. So on December 18th, 1881, Rufus Dawes leaves Washington, D.C., crosses over the Potomac River to Arlington Cemetery. There are 16,000 Union dead buried in the cemetery. He's going to the cemetery to find the graves of men from the 6th Wisconsin who are buried there. So this is what the letter is about. My dear wife, I have today worshipped at the shrine of the dead. I went over to Arlington Cemetery. It was a beautiful morning, and the familiar scenes so strongly impressed upon me during my young manhood were pleasant. Many times I went over that road, admiring the beautiful city and great white Capitol, with its then unfinished dome, going to hear the great men of that day in Congress. An ambitious imagination then builded castles of the time when I might take my place there. Now at middle age, with enthusiasm sobered by hard fights and hard facts, I ride, not run, with elastic step over the same road, with this ambition at least realized, and warmth enough left in my heart to enjoy it. My friends and comrades, poor fellows, who followed my enthusiastic leadership in those days, and followed it to the death which I, by a merciful providence, escaped, lie here, 24 of them, on the very spot where our winter camp of 1861-62 was located. I found every grave and stood beside it with uncovered head. I looked over nearly the full 16,000 headboards to find the 24, but they all died alike, and I was determined to find all. Poor little Fenton, who put his head above the works at Cold Harbor and got a bullet through his temples and lived 3 days with his brains out, came to me in memory as fresh as one of my own boys of today. And Levi Pearson, one of the 3 brothers of Company A, who died for their country in the 6th Regiment, and Richard Gray, Paul Mulater, Dennis Kelly, Chris Bundy, all young men who fell at my side and under my command. For what they died, I fight a little longer. Over their graves, I get inspiration to stand for all they won in establishing our government upon freedom, equality, justice, liberty, and protection to the humblest. So, what can we derive from this story from Dawes? Well, I think Dawes tells us something about leadership, the burden of command, the responsibility of command. He reminds us, and this is not just about being a soldier, this is about being a leader. Whether you're a teacher or whatever you are, if you're a leader of people, Dawes has a lesson, a message for you. He reminds us of the responsibility of a leader to those under him or her. All right, you have a responsibility. He doesn't shirk that responsibility. So these men followed him in 1862 to 1865. He's never forgotten. This is 1881. He's still their commander. He's the essence of a good leader. He is the person who, he doesn't forget those who served under him and lost their lives. He knows how lucky he is that he survived the war. So Dawes went through till about in the summer of 1864. He'd gone through every major battle of the Army of the Potomac. He had never been wounded. He had a bullet graze him at the Battle of Antietam. He's never been wounded. He's had all sorts of friends killed. He's had all sorts of friends wounded, taken prisoner. It played on his mind. Ultimately, in the summer of 64, after the bloodbath of the Overland Campaign, Dawes realizes, I can't do this any longer. And he, at Petersburg, he resigns his commission and he leaves the Army. He's probably suffering from serious PTSD at this point. He's just He's just had it. He can't do it any longer. But he doesn't forget what he just wishes he'd been there. And one of the officers in the regiment wrote him later in 1864, 65, and they said, listen, I know you wish you were with us, but if you'd stayed with us, you certainly would not have survived this. I mean, you did the best thing. You went home. But they never forgot that Dawes always looked out for his men. If you read his book, Reminiscences of the Six Wisconsin Volunteers, it's about the men. It's not about Dawes. It's about the men who served under Dawes. And what does he say that these men lost their lives for? Why did they die? He tells us they died for freedom. They died for equality. They died for justice. They died for liberty and protection to the humblest. That's something worth fighting for. I don't care if you're in 1862 or 2026. What Dawes writes about there is the essence of what a leader is asking of the people who follow him. And I certainly think that Dawes is a lesson for today, right now, right? Don't you think? I mean, Dawes is a lesson for what leadership should be. Okay, let's move on to the last one. Our last individual is Abraham Lincoln. This is Abraham Lincoln. You can see him with George McClellan in October of 1862, a few weeks after the Battle of Antietam. And to the left of that, you see the Emancipation Proclamation. So we know the outlines of the story. The Battle of Antietam is fought September 17th. The Confederate Army retreats from Sharpsburg on the night of September 18th. And by the 21st of September, everybody's out of Maryland, and Maryland's clear. On September 22nd, Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring all slaves in the states in rebellion or behind Confederate lines are free. All right, that's the outlines of the story. But the lesson that I want to get at is that it's a lot more complicated than that simple story that I just told. So we need some context to understand what the lesson is here that Lincoln is teaching us with this Emancipation Proclamation. When the war begins in 1861, Abraham Lincoln despised slavery. He didn't like slavery. He knew, as did anybody in the war, that he knew that was the cause of the war. Slavery had brought on secession and war. But he doesn't feel that he can do anything about it. He cannot attack it directly. He can't declare all the slaves free. A lot of people write that about Lincoln. Why didn't he just declare the slaves free? Well, he didn't, because Kentucky and Missouri and possibly Maryland would have seceded from the Union, and the Union probably would have lost the war. So he can't do that. And he adopts what is called a limited war policy, which is you are fighting to preserve the Union. You're not fighting to abolish slavery or destroy slavery. You're fighting to put the Union back together again the way it was, meaning slavery would still exist. So that's the policy through 1861 on into 1862. There are some big battles, particularly the Battle of Shiloh, and then you're going to get some fighting on the Virginia Peninsula, at Yorktown, at Williamsburg, at Seven Pines, the 7 Days battles. It's becoming pretty obvious to anybody observing this war that the South is in deadly earnest. And Lincoln realizes that during all this time period, Lincoln has been lobbying the border states to accept compensated emancipation. The government will pay them to emancipate their slaves, and they won't do it. They will not do it. So I used to encounter a lot of times people would tell me, oh, slavery was just going to die out. It just would have died out eventually. I say all the evidence argues to the contrary. All the evidence we have argues to the contrary. Slavery would not have died out easily. People were unbelievably wedded to it, particularly financially wedded to it. So Lincoln, he's tried, it's failed, and now he watches this war and he's like, look, these people are in deadly earnest, and we can't fight this war with one arm tied behind our back. I mean, the source of the economic power of the Confederacy is their slaves, and we need to do something about it. So he draws up an Emancipation Proclamation. And before he draws up the Emancipation Proclamation, before he's drawn it up, he travels down to Harrison's Landing to visit George McClellan. The 7 days battles has ended. McClellan has been defeated. He's retreated to Harrison's Landing. And when Lincoln gets down to Harrison's Landing, he meets with McClellan. He's trying to take the pulse of McClellan and his army to see what the condition is, what they might be capable of doing. He's kind of losing confidence in McClellan at this point. And McClellan hands him a document that he's been working on. And Lincoln thanks him. And when Lincoln reads the document, it is George McClellan advising Lincoln as the commander of the Army of the Potomac on your political policy, your policy that I have to carry out is very important. And I'm going to comment on your policy. He has every right to do this. I've read people who said McClellan didn't have a right to do this, etc. He was exceeding his authority. That's nonsense. McClellan had every right to advise the president, this is how I see things. And one of the things that McClellan tells Lincoln is do not take any radical action on emancipation. If you do that, the army will likely dissolve because the soldiers are not going to fight for that. Now, George McClellan in some ways is projecting what George McClellan feels about this. So Lincoln reads this document. He thanks McClellan for it. He goes back to Washington, D.C., and he writes an Emancipation Proclamation. He writes it. He doesn't have a staff write it. Lincoln writes it. He's a lawyer. It's a very formal document because he knows that the document might be brought to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's very conservative, and they might try and overturn it. So he has to be very careful and very precise in the language that it uses and where the proclamation applies, because he's using his power as the commander-in-chief to exercise this authority. So he's drawn this proclamation up, calls a cabinet meeting, presents the proclamation to his cabinet, and his cabinet reads it, and they go, well, we're okay with it, but, the war's not going very well. And if you issue this right now, it's going to look like the dying gasp, the last gasp of a dying administration. You need a military victory. You need to issue this from a position of strength. Well, he's hoping he's going to get that military victory because he's got a new commander from the West, John Pope, who's taking command of the Union forces in Northern Virginia. And Pope is hopefully going to defeat Robert E. Lee, and Lincoln then can issue his proclamation from a position of strength. Well, that didn't work out. Pope is utterly defeated at the Battle of Second Manassas. His army and the Army of the Potomac combined are driven into the fortifications of Washington. It is chaos. There are a lot of people, in fact, some really good, solid officers in the Union Army who are convinced that the Southern Confederacy is going to be recognized. The war is going to be lost. It is a shambles. And then Lincoln needs to name a commander to take command of the army because the Confederate Army crosses the Potomac River and goes into Maryland. He's got a crisis on his hands. This is a huge crisis. He has to meet this. So the Emancipation Proclamation, there's no chance you're getting that thing out. You need a victory. So he appoints George McClellan. So what did McClellan tell him about emancipation? Don't do it. Don't do it. You can dissolve the armies. So Lincoln puts in command of the army the individual who doesn't believe in the policy that Lincoln needs him to deliver a military victory so he can issue, right? Crazy. Anyway, McClellan delivers the victory. He wins the battle. He fights the Battle of South Mountain. He wins the Battle of Antietam. Although the battle itself is kind of a drawn affair, right? It's a draw. And then Lee's army retreats on the night of the 18th. They go back into Virginia. There's a sharp skirmish at Shepherdstown. The campaign is over. So operationally, it's a Union victory. That means operationally means the theater of war. Maryland, Northern Virginia, operationally, it's a success for the Union. It's not a strategic victory. Lincoln is going to make it a strategic victory. But before he can do that, on September 22nd, the day he issues the proclamation, he calls a special meeting of his cabinet. And he presents to them his Emancipation Proclamation. And one of the people who was present, Secretary Gideon Welles, who was the Secretary of Navy, he said he invited their critique of the document, but not their opinion on whether it was the proper moment to publish it. He was satisfied he was right, wrote Welles. His mind was fixed, his decision made, but he wished his paper announcing his course as correct in terms as it could be made without any change in his determination. So the Postmaster General, Montgomery Blair, gave him the opinion. He says, I approve of the principle of the proclamation, but I object to it on the grounds that the border states will secede from the Union the moment it's read, and that it would give Democrats a club of which, and the Democrats in this era are the conservatives. It would give the Democrats a club of which they could avail themselves to beat the administration. Lincoln listens to that and he replies, he says, I've made every effort to find a compromise acceptable to the border states without success. It's time to move forward without them. As for the Democrats, their clubs would be used against us, take what course we might. So he issues the Emancipation Proclamation. 2 days after learning of the proclamation and reading it, George McClellan writes to his wife, the president's late proclamation, the continuation of Stanton and Halleck, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton and Henry Halleck, the General in Chief of the Army, in office, and McClellan hated them both, in office rendered almost impossible for me to retain my commission and self-respect at the same time. I cannot make up my mind to fight for such an accursed doctrine as that of a servile insurrection. It is too infamous. So Lincoln believes this is going to cause a slave insurrection. I don't think I can stay in the Army. I cannot support this policy. Fitz John Porter, McClellan's favorite general, commander of the Fifth Army Corps, very good soldier. He wrote to Manton Marble, who was the editor of the New York Herald, that the proclamation was ridiculed in the Army, causing disgust, discontent, and expressions of disloyalty to the views of the administration, amounting, I have heard, to insubordination. He argued that soldiers like himself and McClellan sought to bring about an honorable end to the conflict, but their efforts were being upset by the absurd proclamations of a political coward. This is where I would say that here's the lesson that we can learn from Lincoln. He is the opposite of a political coward. This was an act of great courage to put this out, political courage, and it was a brilliant strategic move. Lincoln changes Antietam with this document from an operational victory to a strategic victory. So how does it become a strategic victory? There's three reasons. This is my argument. There's three reasons. And one of them is articulated by Frederick Douglass at the time. Douglass wrote the following: the Emancipation Proclamation places the North on the side of justice and civilization, and the rebels on the side of robbery and barbarism. It will disarm all purpose on the part of European government to intervene in favor of the rebels and thus cast off at a blow one source of rebel power. That's the first reason, strategic. That document is almost guaranteed England and France in particular are not going to intervene in the war. There's an outside chance they might have, but it's very unlikely. That's strategic. When you have removed the possibility of European intervention in this war. Number two, it strikes a powerful blow at the foundation of the Confederacy's economy and its ability to make war. Enslaved people provide the Confederacy with an immense labor force in agriculture and industry, which enables it to mobilize large numbers of able-bodied white men into the army while still producing the material of war and the food to sustain their armies. All right, so the people who are enslaved are going to learn about this. And when any Union army comes anywhere near an enslaved person, they're going to try and get to the army, right? So they're going to try to escape. So you're going to have your labor force constantly trying to get away, get to the Union army, because they know if they can get to them, that's freedom. That leads to the third strategic success for Lincoln here. It means that the Confederacy is going to have to maintain a certain percentage of its manpower on the home front to prevent leaking its captive force to freedom. All three of those things are strategic. When we say strategic, big, they transcend this period of the war. They transcend almost the whole war here. So this is a document based on the success of the Battle of Antietam that Lincoln is able to make Antietam a strategic victory. So what I would say, the lesson that we can draw from this is Lincoln seizes the moment. Now, there's lots of leaders in history who've seized the moment for nefarious reasons. This is not a nefarious reason. This is a good reason. So did Lincoln think his decision was going to poll well? Like a politician today might look at the polls, is this going to poll well? Well, the Confederacy is fighting a war opposed to the very idea of emancipation. The Democrats in the North don't care. They don't want a war of emancipation. And some Republicans are afraid that Lincoln is handing the Democrats a weapon that they can use in the upcoming elections. It's a winning issue for them. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? This is controversial. Don't be controversial. Don't do this. I would argue that what Lincoln teaches us is a good leader guides people where he or she thinks they should go, not doing what the people want or expect at the moment. And Lincoln's going to do the same thing again with the Gettysburg Address. The very first sentence of the Gettysburg Address, 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth in this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Well, half of the country didn't believe people all were created equal. Maybe more than half didn't believe that. He was making a statement from the Declaration of Independence that a lot of people in this country did not believe and did not support. He's trying to lead the country. Yes, the Emancipation Proclamation is a political document, but it is also one that was morally right. So he seizes the moment for the right reasons to make the country better. And in doing so, he incurs a great risk of backlash. So Lincoln is willing to take the risk to do something that he knows is going to advance the possibility of success for his cause, but which is also the right thing to do. So these are just some of the lessons that I think that are waiting to be found. This is 4 people associated with the Battle of Antietam, which has over 100,000 people. But take your pick. It doesn't have to be Antietam. It could be any other historical event in American history or outside of American history. There's lessons to be learned. The one thing about history that I would say has always helped me is history has always given me perspective. And I think that's one of the great values of history is it can give us perspective on our own lives. I also think that it's good for our mental health. And that's something that we can all we could all appreciate in this time period. So, okay, I'm going to stop talking now. I'm going to let Jen ask some questions. I think we're almost out of time anyway. I'm sorry for that, but let's see if we can get to a few questions here.
Hey, Scott, thank you so much for that. Illuminating as always. I'm going to ask a question from the list that you and I curated, and then I'm going to pluck a few out of the chat.
Okay.
The first question I want to ask is one that what I've always admired about you is that you are not just well read and detailed and thorough in the study of the Civil War, but many of America's military conflicts. And I'm curious if you could speak a little bit about how knowledge of other wars in American history has helped inform your understanding and your writing about the Battle of Antietam.
I think what it does is it gives you a context. It puts it in context because it's easy when you immerse yourself in something. You dedicate years of your life to, say, studying the Battle of Antietam. There's a tendency to think, wow, nobody's ever experienced anything like this before. I mean, this is unbelievable. So you can tend to hyperbolize, to exaggerate what Antietam is, how terrible Antietam is. I remember something when I was working at Gettysburg, Oftentimes our young interpreters and our interns, when they would be in the National Cemetery doing a program about the aftermath of the battle, they would oftentimes exaggerate all of the destruction, just destruction. Everything it was conjuring up images of towns you might have seen in the First World War or the Second World War. Well, Gettysburg wasn't anything like that. So if you have the knowledge of what these things were like, then you're not going to say things like that. Fredericksburg, Virginia was far worse. Chambersburg, Pennsylvania was burned. So I think studying other periods of history outside of American history as well, because we're all human beings. And there's another number of lessons that you can derive. You can go all the way back to ancient times. Humans are humans, but it provides you a context so that you also understand that people who are in war oftentimes behave the same. It doesn't matter what war it is. Their culture may be a little bit different. Their society may be a little bit different from what they come from. But ultimately, once they're in the war, the way people behave is often very similar from conflict to conflict.
A great response. I've often said that Civil War historians would benefit from being better military historians, and I know that's a philosophy that you share. Let me ask a question from the chat. Kevin, thanks for joining us from Boston. Kevin asks if you could speak to how Representative Diamond's experience was throughout the Army of the Potomac's experience at Antietam.
Oh, that's a good question. I think his experience was slightly different than some other surgeons. Some of the other surgeons, it may have depended upon the medical director, what Army Corps you were in, may have been a little bit better organized, had a little bit better leadership. The problem was all of the hospitals, the conditions at the hospital would have been terrible if you were there. But there was an organization to the hospital. So Dr. Jonathan Letterman, who was the chief surgeon of the Army of the Potomac, had established a Letterman system. So there was a system in how soldiers who were hit would be evacuated from the battlefield. What was supposed to happen? A soldier's hit. There are stretcher bearers who are supposed to carry him from a stretcher to an ambulance. He's put in an ambulance. He's taken to a divisional hospital. The divisional hospital might do some, they're kind of like an aid station in a way. So the Roulette Farm behind the sunken lane is an aid station. Hundreds of men go. I think probably several thousand men go through that hospital, and they're going to get immediate medical attention. It's going to seem really, really chaotic, but there is a system to it. Then the core hospitals that are established farther in the rear are the places where surgery is going to take place. Now, surgery takes place at divisional hospitals as well. People are getting their limbs amputated and so on. These aren't hard and fast rules. But the thing about Antietam is that you're going to have the greatest system in the world. But if you're flooded with wounded, you're going to have a problem on your hands. So that's why Dr. Diamond is faced with, he's got 140 wounded. There's no provisions for him. There's no nothing. They're kind of overwhelmed with the number of wounded that they have. So you can imagine if you've gone through some engagements, if you're in the Ninth Corps and you've gone through some engagements down in North Carolina, and maybe there were, a couple hundred casualties in that, and now you come into an engagement in which your corps suffers close to 2,000 casualties. What sort of preparations do you have medically as far as equipment, surgeons, etc.? You also nobody had dedicated medical personnel like nurses and stewards and so on, except for hospitals that would be established in towns like Frederick, Maryland, Baltimore, Maryland, Philadelphia, and so on. Those people are detailed from line units to do those jobs. Dr. Letterman had tried to get a professional service, but he'd been shot down by the Secretary of War, Stanton, and by General in Chief Halleck because they didn't want to dedicate any more people to jobs like that. So it would take a while before the Army would have a professional medical service. So Diamond's experience is probably a little bit more extreme. There were some that were probably worse than Diamond's because they had a lot more wounded at them, but they probably had more provisions there. And one of the things that made people like Maria Hall so important, and also the U.S. Sanitary Commission and the Christian Commission, but particularly the Sanitary Commission, is they brought a lot of supplies that the Army didn't have and desperately needed. And they also brought uh, physicians and surgeons who were in civilian life who came to help in Antietam, and that started to alleviate a lot of the problem. But the issue with the wounded was I mean, that's why I like Diamond's account so well, is it was really, really difficult. And Diamond, the other point I want to make about Diamond is that he's on the Union side. The Confederate situation for field hospitals was worse because they had less personnel and they had less supplies because a lot of the supplies, medical supplies, had not caught up to the Army from the Second Manassas campaign.
Great, thank you for that. Scott, let me ask one last question so we don't overextend our welcome too much on Zoom. This question's from Lee. Lee, thanks for your comment and attending tonight. It's about Maria Hall. Lee writes, how much help was Maria Hall able to give the Lincoln children? How long was she with the family?
I think she was with the family for a week, and I think that she provided comfort. I mean, she just provided comfort. She was a person of sterling character and courage. And I think Dorothea Dix understood that because Maria Hall was younger, that made her more ideal to deal with the Lincolns. I don't know if Dorothea Dix knew how traumatized Mary Todd Lincoln was from the death of her other son, because she was highly traumatized by that. And Maria Hall commented about that in dealing with Mrs. Lincoln. But I think she just provided a comfort for the Lincolns but she was only there for about a week.
Perfect. Scott, thank you so much. I speak on behalf of all of us on Zoom. We got near 200 tonight for your program. Thank you for joining us here at Shepherd University for the President's Lecture this evening. Brilliant, as we would expect with you. Credit to many, many years of hard work and brilliance in research, writing, and interpretation. To all of you on Zoom, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I wish you good wishes and stay warm, and happy 2026, y'all. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
All
so
right,
you.
much,
thank
everybody.
you.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Scott.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Good
Scott.
talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.